Hi, I'm Matthew, and I've received an offer to read French and Spanish at Oxford. I'm going to talk about my own personal journey and what help I found pivotal along the way. The first step in any university journey, but particularly for Oxbridge, is the decision. The first big decision I had to make was Oxford or Cambridge. For most, there are two major factors which lead them to choose one of the universities over its counterpart: the place and the course. I'd spent time in both cities in the past and loved both equally, so this wasn't much help for me. However, after looking into the details of their respective courses and engaging with some current students, I found that Oxford placed more weight on their literature, something which appealed to me enormously. So to be clear, it was the course that was most personally linked to me academically and in my interests. With this crucial aspect out of the way, the second major decision for me was which college to choose. Although the prospect of around 30 colleges at Oxford can seem a bit of a daunting list to narrow down, there is some guidance I found really useful. I would strongly suggest not to follow the statistics too blindly. Although these might give you an idea which college you might have been unlikely to get into in the past years, everyone in your position is looking at those same numbers, making the same judgments as you. And these numbers will shift very quickly as a result of that. The next thing I thought about was what type of college I wanted. Some are larger, some are more imposing, others more intimate and more contemporary in their field. Ask yourself as well whether you wish to be further from the city or more central. The final thought for me was related to the specialisms of the tutors. While you certainly want to be focused on what interests you personally, it doesn't hurt to have an idea equally of the specialisms of your tutors that are going to be teaching you for 3 years. So ultimately, it was these choices which took me to Exeter College, Oxford, a small, intimate college in the centre of Oxford. The next phase for me consisted of a longer-term preparation. This included helpful sessions provided by Miss Badlow, Mr. Cavendish, and my subject mentors. I took great advantage of the help offered at school and stole basically all of the lunchtimes offered to me by any willing teachers. Sometimes these sessions would be catch-up to discuss something I'd read recently, and on other occasions we would work through a grammar test or simply discuss a new text. These sessions have to be complemented by extra reading though. It's not necessarily a competition of who is reading the most or the most widely. Rather, it's a question of who is able to identify and extract the most pertinent and valuable points from the piece being studied. After I read a text, I would write down all of my thoughts on a Word document, and for certain works, I would even find articles to add something more academic to my own thoughts. When talking about my reading, it's important to note that I was preparing for what is technically a joint honours of 2 languages, although they're both under the umbrella term of languages. This meant that I had to try my best to divide my studies equally between them, not favouring one too much over the other. Admissions test praxis is also something I incorporated very early on, and I'm infinitely grateful for it now. I knew that at Oxford a greater importance is placed on the admissions test, as it's this that really leads you to interview. From the very beginning, I made sure I was comfortable with every grammar point in both of my languages, and from there I began to practice on the most obscure translations I could find online or wherever. When it came to a few months before my test, I started doing the past papers, which are also all available online from Oxford. The shorter term preparation for me was mock interviews. Again, I pestered all of my teachers in any lunchtime to give me mock interviews, and I sourced a few with the help of Miss Badlow and even outside of school. It was this frequent repetition for me which ultimately made me so much more comfortable in the environment when it came to the real thing. This was paramount for me. And in the real interviews, when they asked me what I'd read recently of interest, and then they gave me a poem, I was far more comfortable. They then asked me questions about the respective text that I was given. I wasn't sure what they would expect of my spoken French or Spanish, as different people had told me their own personal stories. Unfortunately or not, in both of my interviews, I found myself speaking the target languages far more than anyone had told me I would. From these interviews, though, I did find the advice that I'd been given to be very true. They didn't seem to mind if I didn't pick something up from the text that they expected, or if I hadn't even understood something. They cared more about how I responded to what they suggested, and it's this same idea of teachability, which is really what they find important. Overall, my main reflections for you are: consider your decisions early, be consistent. Little and often is always far more effective. Take advantage of any and all help that is offered to you. And finally, what helped relieve some of the stress and give me a sense of perspective was the assurance that nobody is placing any pressure or expectation on you to get in. This is your effort, your application, and ultimately your achievement. Thank you, and all the best with your application.